While you would normally be correct to doubt that one person can be an expert at motivational speaking, individual therapy, trauma, medicine, psychiatry, leadership, executive coaching, marriage counseling, and more, Dr. Watson is the exception to the rule and is an expert in all of these areas. He's an exception to the rule because he has lived a life like nobody else. But to truly understand why this claim is true, you have to see a brief overview of some of his life. To understand Dr. Watson, you first need to understand how the 4 pillars of hard work, adaptation, identifying needs, and creating resources were the foundation to him becoming the man and doctor that he is today. Dr. Watson explains that first, the capacity for hard work is the foundation to all happiness and accomplishment in life. Second, life will never go as planned, and that only those who can adapt will enjoy success and happiness in life. Third, resources and knowledge are necessary for success. Therefore, successful people quickly identify an accurate list of necessary resources or knowledge for any situation. Fourth, many times a bureaucracy or insecure people will make resources difficult to obtain. Success often requires us to sacrifice and create the needed resources. Those 4 pillars are the foundation to all the knowledge and successes that help Dr. Watson become truly exceptional. His story starts as being the 4th of 7 children. He was raised in a rural farming community by parents who purposely prioritized their children's learning and success above their own immediate comforts. Dr. Watson's father was an intelligent and caring man who was known for his expertise in teaching and mathematics. His father started his post-collegiate career by accepting a temporary job as a small-town high school math teacher. Even though the teacher's salary was barely above the poverty line, his parents accepted the position for the work experience needed to move into higher-paying positions. At this job, his father learned why students had traditionally struggled with math and customized his teaching methods to help the students understand the difficult concepts. This customized approach soon led to his students being top performers on college equivalency exams in algebra, trigonometry, and calculus. As the students excelled, his father received awards and his students were the first in that school to be given college credits for math classes. His success soon led to recruiting attempts by corporations, universities, and more. While his parents initially planned on leaving for higher-paying jobs, they ultimately declined these offers because this small farming community provided a setting where their children's development would be maximized. Dr. Watson's mother was just as talented and dedicated to the children's development as his father. She was also willing to put the children's development first, and that's why she delayed her own career and to remain in the home until the last child entered school. Once his youngest sibling entered school, his mother started her career as a special education teacher. She also applied the 4 pillars in her approach. Instead of just following the patterns of every other special education teacher, she dedicated time to learning how a disabled child's brain worked differently and customized her teaching for each individual student. This led to amazing improvements with her students. Eventually, her students' success resulted in her being nationally recognized as an expert in special education. While his parents' career choices resulted in a very humble upbringing where money was always in short supply, Dr. Watson believes that his upbringing was invaluable to his development and a testament to his parents' vision. Hard work. From his earliest memories, Hans remembers his home being a place where everyone learned that hard work is the first step in success. One of the many examples was his father. In addition to teaching full-time, his father happily worked second jobs during the school year and fought forest fires during the summer breaks. When he wasn't working a second job, his father was working alongside his wife in the home. His mother also worked tirelessly as a homemaker and was a guiding example of a hard worker for her children. Hans watched her happily work to raise the children and maintain the home from morning until night. Hans also remembers that completing the work was a team effort. He routinely saw his father come home from a long day's work, and together, his parents would divide any remaining duties. This included cooking, cleaning, washing dishes, helping children, homework, yard work, and more. His upbringing taught him to be grateful for the health necessary to engage in hard work. He also learned how hard work was necessary to connect socially with the best peers. His parents' efforts to teach the lesson of hard work was so successful that some of his fondest childhood memories involve working long hours alongside his parents or siblings. Adapt. Because he was raised in a small home with 9 family members, he always shared a room with a sibling, and this started his education on how to adapt. Additionally, his parents emphasized the value of appreciating differences in culture, backgrounds, or personal preferences. He saw how those that appreciate differences generally connect with others, and together they succeed. He also saw how rigid individuals who struggle to adapt were often isolated and prevented from succeeding. He learned to see when it was necessary to compromise and adapt in order for the whole team to grow closer and succeed. Identify necessary resources and knowledge. Growing up, Dr. Watson remembers asking his parents for items that he wanted, and this spurring a discussion about what resources or knowledge would be necessary to obtain that item. One example was when he and his siblings wanted a trampoline. The children requested that the parents purchase a trampoline. The parents wisely used this opportunity to explore, as a family, what resources and knowledge would be necessary. This discussion led to the children realizing that they needed to identify how much it would cost and where it could be placed in the yard. Within a short time, the parents helped the children to identify a quality tramp, and this led to them realizing how much money would be needed. The family then discussed how to pay for this trampoline. The parents revealed that they had been saving money for a vacation, but were willing to put that money toward the tramp. The children decided to forego the vacation, but realized that the vacation money would not be enough. However, the parents wouldn't let them back out of their decision. Instead of giving up, the children would need to identify a way of raising additional funds. The children set out to find ways of raising the additional money and concluded that the best way to raise the money would be collecting aluminum cans and selling them to the recyclers. The children recognized that collecting aluminum cans on the side of the road would take too long and sought other ways to obtain large amounts of aluminum cans. They discovered that a local horse racing track had thousands of beer and soda cans left behind or thrown away whenever there was a race. Therefore, they obtained permission and dedicated many hours cleaning up cans after horse races. Their efforts of identifying the necessary resources, combined with hard work and adaptation, resulted in them getting truckloads of cans over a single summer. Recycling these cans provided enough extra money to buy their trampoline. They enjoyed that trampoline for multiple decades. Create resources. Much like in the example with the trampoline, the family's limited finances and the parents' guidance created a perfect classroom to learn how to create resources when they aren't initially available. When items eventually wore out or broke, instead of seeing an example of throwing it away or immediately buying a new item, he watched his parents and siblings take extra time to identify the item's specific part that had broken. Once they understood what was broken, they would create resources by using items available in their environment to create the needed part. Dr. Watson proudly relates one example of this. When he approached his father requesting his own bicycle to ride with the other neighborhood children, they discussed that the family couldn't afford to buy a new bike. But his father promised that if he would learn how a bike works, together they would make a new bike. Hans agreed and excitedly worked with his father learning how a bicycle works. Once he understood how each part of a bicycle worked, they took a trip to the local landfill. Dr. Watson remembers how exciting it was to sift through discarded bicycles looking for salvageable parts. Eventually, they found enough functioning parts to create a working bicycle. With his father's help, they combined those parts to make a bike that was seen by Hans's friends as one of the best bikes in the neighborhood. With a childhood that taught him to work hard, adapt, identify needs, and create resources, Dr. Watson had a foundation that allowed him to develop skills in life like no one else. After graduating from high school, Hans made two decisions that further gave experience and education that separates him from anyone else. First, he chose to serve a 2-year church mission and was assigned to live with the people of Mexico. During his mission, the 4 pillars enabled him to succeed as a missionary. But even more important than his missionary success was the further development of his ability to understand other people's viewpoints. This ability grew immensely as he lived with and learned from some of the most humble people in the most remote parts of Mexico. His genuine love for the people led to an increased ability to connect and understand each other. It was here that he started to learn how to see why other perspectives and traditions, even those that we disagree with, are valuable. His ability to adapt and love different people became so advanced that he would eventually apply this skill in his therapy clinics, where he would help people from all different walks of life. His appreciation of differences is one reason he succeeded when he worked with individuals, couples, and families in therapy, even when the patients have very different viewpoints. Second, because he didn't have the resources to pay for college, he enlisted in the United States Army as a way to obtain those resources. As an enlisted soldier, he was part of a field artillery unit and worked with soldiers from completely different cultures and upbringings. Again, he quickly learned to appreciate others and was able to forge close relationships with people from completely different locations, races, religious backgrounds, and value systems. Hans was so successful that he rapidly reached the enlisted rank of E5. He attended college where he applied and was enrolled in a special scholarship program with the Army's ROTC, or Reserve Officer Training Corps. This special ROTC program allowed prior enlisted soldiers to concurrently attend college, continue performing military duties, and receive training to become an Army officer. Hans would build on the 4 pillars and receive advanced leadership training. Hans graduated from both the ROTC and from the university at the same time, and the military recognized him as a top performer who possessed many special skills. In addition to recognizing his proficiency in the 4 pillars, the military also recognized his leadership potential and ability to speak a foreign language. They appointed him to the rank of 2nd lieutenant in the Army and reassigned him from the field artillery to a prestigious human intelligence unit within the Military Intelligence Corps. This new assignment would lead to him being trained to lead interrogators and counterintelligence agents, whose whole job was to understand the workings of the human mind. Even though Hans didn't know it, his dedication to this new job would further prepare him to understand the nuances of the human mind. While Hans enjoyed being successful as an intelligence officer, he wasn't completely fulfilled in this role. Therefore, after he and his wife consulted, they decided to pursue a change in careers. He would work to become a physician. He continued fulfilling his duty as an intelligence officer, but started to attend night school to fulfill the medical school prerequisite classes. Hans quickly completed the minimum necessary classes for medical school and began preparing to apply for medical school while taking the optional pre-medicine science classes. But fate had something that would further give him education and knowledge while also delaying him becoming a doctor for 2 additional years. Hans made such an impression as an enlisted soldier that the artillery unit remembered him and specifically requested him when they were assigned to deploy to Afghanistan for an 18-month deployment. This request was approved by a 2-star general. This meant that instead of finishing his optional science classes and entering medical school 8 months later, he would be leaving his wife and a 4-month-old child to go to war. When Hans was told about this deployment, the artillery unit promised that his role would be to help train intelligence officers within the Afghan National Army. However, when he arrived in Afghanistan, he was assigned a totally different role. This new role would eventually prove to be invaluable for his work as a doctor, but surviving the experience would require every bit of knowledge and experience he had gained up to that point in his life. Upon arriving, Captain Watson was informed that he would be a combat advisor to an Afghan infantry company. When his assignment was announced, he assumed that the leaders hadn't realized that he was an intelligence officer and explained that he was an intelligence officer and not an infantry officer. However, the leaders didn't care and repeated that his assignment was to be a combat advisor who lives with and fights alongside an Afghan infantry company. Captain Watson realized that his resources for surviving direct combat were 1 American Army sergeant, 1 interpreter, and any experience he had previously gained. He would be expected to perform a combat infantry role that he wasn't trained for, with an infantry unit from a different culture, and his life was at stake. Hans realized that recognizing and adapting to the requirements of an infantry soldier and the requirement of the Afghan culture would be necessary for surviving this combat tour. Hans concluded that survival would require him to connect personally with the Afghan soldiers, and together, they needed to find shared respect that would allow them to come together as a team. This meant that he would need to immediately start following the same pattern he learned as a missionary in Mexico. He needed to understand Afghan culture and people so that he could start adapting his approach to something that would be compatible with both the American Army's infantry standards and the Afghan soldiers' culture. Therefore, he customized his approach to be something that found compromise between the American and Afghan needs, and it worked. He and his Afghan Army company quickly came together, and their cooperation immediately led to unprecedented success. On his first mission with them, they captured about 40 enemy combatants, multiple truckloads of weapons and explosives, large sums of counterfeit cash, and more. While there were certainly bumps in the road, the collaboration between Captain Watson and the Afghan Infantry Company continued to be so impressive that they were noticed by both the American and Afghan commanders. This is why near the end of his time in Afghanistan, he was reassigned to a role at headquarters that would normally be occupied by a senior officer with many more years of experience. While his leadership and accomplishments in direct combat resulted in military awards and accolades, it also caused severe physical and emotional injuries that still plague him today. But these injuries would prove to be extremely valuable. His injuries from war would eventually allow him to directly relate with patients who suffer from their own physical or emotional trauma. When Hans returned from Afghanistan, he restarted the medical school application process. He then investigated whether to attend the traditional allopathic medical school, MD, or to attend an osteopathic medical school, DO. He learned there was no difference between the MDs and DOs, except that a DO learns an extra set of skills. In other words, a DO is simply a doctor that learned everything that an MD knows, plus some additional stuff like adjusting backs and hips. With that understanding, Hans decided to apply exclusively to osteopathic medical schools so that he could learn the extra skills. Hans was accepted to multiple medical schools, but his wartime service left him without the optional science classes. This was a disadvantage because they are the foundation for all science taught in medical school. So while his classmates simply had to add that day's learning to the information they already knew, Hans had to learn the optional science class information, plus the new information from that day's med school lectures. But he applied the 4 pillars and often studied about 100 hours a week throughout medical school. Hans's efforts resulted in good grades, a general understanding of how the healthy body functions, and the ability to repeat memorized details of sicknesses. While this was the common level of understanding for most medical students, it wasn't enough for Hans. He wanted more than just a general understanding with a few memorized details added. So he changed his approach. Hans wanted his foundation to be a deep understanding of how a healthy body works so that he could consider the best treatment possible instead of being limited to the commonly memorized treatments. Every day he took extra time to deeply learn how that part of the body worked, and only then would he transition to learning the details of what was wrong in a sickness and why one treatment is better than another. This approach initially took longer to complete, but it paid off in the long run. He eventually was recognized as a student that demonstrated a more advanced understanding than would be expected at his training level. Upon graduating from medical school, Hans had choices to train in surgery, family medicine, OB/GYN, anesthesia, and more. Ultimately, he chose the prestigious psychiatry program at Wright State University. He chose Wright State because it was one of the rare psychiatric training programs that offered classical training. This means that instead of only training a physician to be a psychiatric pill pusher, he would have the opportunity to also become an expert in psychotherapy. This would be the key to him obtaining the expertise necessary to heal physical injuries, as well as injuries in the conscious and unconscious mind. This prestigious program attracted some of the brightest and most talented doctors in the world, who helped him to further develop his skills. Dr. Watson's mentors and peers often were so advanced in a specific area that they were seen as national and world-renowned experts in those areas. By combining his work ethic and their willingness to teach, he began to develop expertise in neurology, the psychology of the conscious mind, and the psychology of the unconscious mind. But even with these experts' help, Dr. Watson still didn't feel like he had the deep understanding that was needed. He asked many of these experts what made the difference when 2 people experienced the same trauma and one developed a mental health condition and the other didn't. Unfortunately, he never felt like he received a clear answer. Most of the time, he was told that some people are just unlucky. Dr. Watson knew that there was more to it and realized that in spite of being trained by some of the best minds alive, he would have to figure this out on his own. This led to Dr. Watson tirelessly studying to understand how the healthy brain worked. He then focused on identifying the part of the brain that was dysfunctional in each mental health condition. Next, he investigated the various things that could cause that part of the brain to not work correctly. And finally, he sought out training in all the treatments that could restore health to that part of the brain. This included training in therapies such as EMDR, CBT, CPT, DBT, psychodynamic psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, motivational enhancement therapy, and more. It was during his residency training that he gained enough knowledge to see why mental health conditions happen in some while not in the others, and to customize each patient's treatment to their individual situation. His dedication resulted in him being one of the psychiatrists who was still in residency, but was becoming an expert at both the medical and therapy parts of treatment. His recognition as an expert with medications, therapy for individuals, therapy for couples, and most other mental health conditions led to him becoming an author that was published in scholarly journals and textbook chapters. As his reputation became more well-known, Dr. Watson was requested as a keynote speaker on mental health, leadership, suicide prevention, marriage, and more. This led to him being sought out when a national tragedy struck. Shortly after one of the conferences where Dr. Watson had been a keynote speaker, he received a call asking for help. The caller explained that their organization was preparing a PTSD training seminar for therapists in an area where the most deadly mass shooting at a high school had taken place. She requested that Dr. Watson train these therapists. He agreed and trained approximately 250 therapists to help the students and families that were affected by this tragic shooting. Without intending to become such, Dr. Watson had become an expert on mental health response for mass casualty events, and he continues to conduct these trainings. Dr. Watson's customized approach has proven effective in both civilian and military populations. During his last few years in the military, he helped many patients return to full duty, even when they were previously considered too sick to continue in the military. As his reputation grew, he was often requested to evaluate and treat members from the special forces, pilots, nuclear weapons operators, and more. After retiring from the military, Dr. Watson excitedly returned to civilian life and wrote a few books to help his patients. These books were life-changing for many patients and resulted in many mental health providers wanting him to train them. He agreed, but was careful to avoid disparaging or undervaluing the skills that other providers already had. Instead, he taught the mental health professionals to bring all their knowledge and experience and let him add to it. He named this new training and treatment approach brain reactivation therapy, or BRT for short. And BRT is making a difference in thousands of lives. While this is only a small part of Dr. Watson's story, it gives a glimpse of why his training, experience, and knowledge are one of a kind. So when someone explains that he is an expert at motivational speaking, individual therapy, trauma, medicine, psychiatry, leadership, executive coaching, marriage counseling, and more, you can see that he really does have the experience, education, and training to justify their opinion. They are justified because it's likely that you will never meet another person with the experience and education of a small-town boy, missionary, husband, enlisted soldier, army officer, parent, combat-proven veteran, civilian business leader, medical doctor, psychiatrist, expert psychotherapist, and more. Dr. Watson is probably the only one in the world